by going to Davos, 1992, July, very impressed, clearly, as he was in South Africa, by the voice of monopoly capital. I'm not saying he bows down to it, but he's certainly impressed in terms of what they're able to do, and comes back from Davos and says that for growth of the economy, we've got to look to the private sector. And he says that it's clear that if we go for radical socialist approach, he uses the term nationalization, we're not going to get the foreign investment from the capitalist world that we need to make the country run and to overcome our poverty. So it's a total change. And this is where I say our Faustian pact or bargain stems from. It stems not just from Mandela, who is making this announcement and is following this through, but Joe Slovo, Ronnie Kasrils, the left wing of the ANC, which was predominant, our whole Communist Party. There's no real debate or argument about this. Mandela really is the icon, which he shouldn't have been, for his fellow revolutionaries. He's a leader amongst other leaders. He's always about a collective, but Mandela is very firm on a course of approach once he's made up his mind. And I note that people like Joe and others actually go along with him. Now, the reason being that the political kingdom is coming close. And of course, this is a very big issue. We could have had a civil war at the time. There could have been enormous bloodshed. There was tremendous threats from the third force, the police, the soldiers operating undercover, and with all sorts of right-wing elements from the Afrikaner extremists. And we were very concerned. Would we be able to move through that situation smoothly and get to a democratic election and form a government based on the people's will? Now, that's an enormous attraction. And that's where Mandela's greatness shows. But I would say at the same time, we push the economic issues onto that back burner, and they successively become distant. So that nationalization, command of the heights of the economy, this becomes a no-no. And once that sets in, and you get the gates open for a nouvelle comprador bourgeoisie to come to the fore, junior partners of big capital and the corporates and the international connections, then we embrace the neoliberal economy of the world today.
Welcome to the Michael Brooks Show. We're broadcasting live from downtown Brooklyn, USA, where left is best as it is everywhere else, with super producer Matt Leck.
Yo.
Chief economist David Griscom.
How's it going?
On this week's program, Kim Ives. He's the editor of Haiti Liberte. We're talking about the state of politics in Haiti now and the story of those mercenaries that were arrested in Haiti several weeks ago. It turns out it's part of a scheme to secure a pretty significant amount of money for Haitian political leadership. We'll talk about that and more. And then Malaika Jabali returns. She's here in studio. We're talking about, well, the insufferability of Beto O'Rourke. That's definitely something what we're going to talk about. Maybe even a Beto O'Rourke round of Beto O'Rourke impressions. But also why the fact that Hillary Clinton does not understand why she lost Wisconsin matters, not just as a fact of historical sort of record setting and political scorekeeping, but because it will directly influence our ability to defeat Donald Trump and usher in progressive politics in 2020, protests gearing up, the Free Lula Committee gets ready for April 7th, the year-long anniversary of the politically motivated imprisonment of Lula da Silva. We'll talk again about that case, recenter everybody on it. Griscom has an economic minute in the post-game, a second edition of the Debunk with Ben Burgess. We're talking about Sam Harris getting owned by multiple people that are better than he is, who aren't named John Van Neumann on Twitter. We also have a really important throwback clip, Nipsey Hussle, after the just terrible shooting, murder of him, serious injuries of two others in LA. Bernie Sanders making aggressive moves on unions and health care. And a gulag, as well as a new segment called Confirming Our Biases, where we talk about one of the greatest travesties of the New York Times of this week, actually. I was going to say of their history, but there's a lot of travesties. And of course, shockingly, this doesn't even involve Barry Weiss. All that and much, much more on this week's Michael Brooks Show. But first, there are elections taking place in South Africa. And South Africa has the paradox of being led by the African National Congress, the liberation movement that led South Africa to democracy and liberation in the early 90s under the iconic leadership of Nelson Mandela and many others, including Oliver Tambo, Walter Sisulu, Joe Slovo, as well as the vital and strategic contributions of Govan Mbeki, Thabo Mbeki, Ronnie Kasrils, and Cyril Ramaphosa, even Jacob Zuma, historically speaking. This is a movement that has produced some of the best leadership, some of the most strategic leadership the world has ever seen. And the fusion, the tripartite partnership with the African National Congress, the South African Labor Union movement, and the South African Communist Party not only led to the liberation of South Africa, but it also built some of the most successful alliances in political history with lessons for how we do politics today. How do we synthesize and transcend the supposed divisions between class and Marxist analysis while liberating all of the areas of identity and race and other areas of subjugation and direct oppression, the relationship between exploitation as an economic function that applies to all workers, no matter how privileged, and full-scale oppression that, of course, hits groups disproportionately and massively, such as the Africans in South Africa under apartheid. It's also a source of incredible frustration and tension, because over 20 years after the liberation, South Africa remains mired in some very serious problems. Most of these problems reflect the fact that the ANC gave up on, or was forced out of doing by international capital, the second liberation. The second liberation was that after a political one, there would be, as the Freedom Charter outlined, a vital document in African National Congress history, a broader realization of economic democracy and redistribution for a flourishing of all South Africans. There was always a profound commitment both to pathways to socialism, as well as what they would call and do call non-racialism and anti-communalism, full, broad-based democracy in South African politics. The ANC has, with incredible exceptions, of course, Mandela's very important leadership, Thabo Mbeki's mixed and complicated record, Jacob Zuma's mostly kleptocratic and cynical one, and Ramaphosa's attempt to impose third-way politics in a global situation where they don't apply. The ANC in power has oscillated between some genuine achievements, but acquiescing to Western capital, as well as following and conforming to other political trends. Let's play a brief clip here. This is a sense of ANC leadership out campaigning in the South African electorate as elections approach on May 8th. There have been multiple professional hits and other acts of violence in regional ANC parties, and a lot of this flows out of, again, the initial need to capitulate to Western and global capital. That's what Casseroles was speaking about there in the cold open, and I've interviewed him about on this show, as patrons know. Then there is the fact that under Jacob Zuma, there was a whole other scale of corruption. Not the corruption that we all consider to be corruption, which is in fact capitalism, which is the submission of human needs to capital interests, but more of the sort of variety that people talk about in the general parlance, like incredible compromise of government by specific interests, such as the Gupta family. The Gupta family were a family of entrepreneurs, initially from India, who had a great deal of connection and sway over the Zuma family and the Zuma government, including apparently, according to some reports, veto power and selection power over key ministries. That type of state capture is what they called it in South Africa. During that time, Jacob Zuma, who had been an intelligence chief in the ANC and a deputy under Thabo Mbeki, he was forced to resign because of corruption allegations then, and also was accused of rape as well, stood trial and was acquitted on those charges. Zuma's government ended up hiring a British PR firm, Bell Pottinger, who were a Tory-connected, London-based PR firm with, again, conservative connections that designed a campaign on white monopoly capital and suggested that Zuma and the Gupta family were instrumental in fighting this thing, even as the Zuma record overall was not left. In fact, it was profoundly anti-labor and was not doing structural questions in the economy, but a sort of cheap misuse of populism and identity politics was deployed to shore up Zuma's power. And Zuma still plays those politics as he tries to keep himself from being prosecuted and keep sway in the ANC today. He's an incredibly effective, fascinating strategist, but unfortunately not one with apparently much ethics or commitment from all available reports. Ramaphosa rises to take Zuma's place. Ramaphosa represents the capital-aligned version of the ANC. He got his start as one of South Africa's best trade unionists, was a major figure in the liberation in the 1980s. After leaving politics, he was deployed to the private sector, where he made hundreds of millions of dollars. And also in 2012, along with, of course, the Zuma government, he is directly implicated in the murder of the Marikana protesters, which were a group of striking miners. Ramaphosa had direct financial interests in this mine through one of his companies and board seats. And there was an email before the day of these killings of him calling for concomitant action, in his words, to take on the wildcat strike. This is who runs the ANC now, and who might be the best of very bleak alternatives. This upcoming election will be important in determining the trajectory of South Africa. And as we've said, over the past couple of decades, the government has taken a developmental first model in the hopes of luring international investment. The economy was boosted by the commodity boom of the early 2000s, as were all of the BRIC countries. But this connection has led to massive unemployment as manufacturing suffered from commodity and the commodity boom ended. There will be no recovery from the economic crisis without massive political change in the ANC or the rise of a new political formation. Now, there is, of course, the EFF, the Economic Freedom Fighters, led by the very charismatic leadership of Julius Malema. They call themselves Marxist-Leninist Fananists. And they are advocating some incredibly important proposals, though Malema was also close to Zuma and didn't form his own party until being sidelined by Zuma. The question remains, is this more sort of populism or Marxism? Then there's the Black Land Movement, which Zuma has apparently been playing footsie with, even as he still sort of campaigns for the ANC in Natal. And as far as I can tell from the BLM, their politics don't have a Marxist strain. They're strongly xenophobic and seem to basically directly echo the talking points that were initially developed by the London-based firm Bell Pottinger. And as we saw with strikes in February, there's still a significant power in the labor movement. South Africa has 30% union density. But because of their entrenchment and relationship to the ANC, There's been a leadership crisis and a struggle between more radical and conciliatory sides of the labor union. NUMSA, importantly, has broken off from the tripartite and is attempting to forge new radical alternatives. The ANC led South Africa out of one of the worst regimes of the 20th century. They immediately faced an international community bent on undermining the power of the post-colonial state. And they did this by uniting and mobilizing a historic base around economic and racial justice. The path forward for the ANC needs to be in both revitalizing their legacy, which I'm sure they still can, and in the years of their success and struggle for liberation, the models and leadership they provided could be a blueprint for the rest of us as well. Do you guys have anything? I know Matt is a big Jacob Zuma fan, so would you like to defend Zuma, Matt?
I prefer Jacob Zima.
I don't even know who is Jacob Zima.
I was just making a Zima joke.
Oh, does that still exist? I joke that Sam drinks Zima, but is that still a company?
I don't know if it is. Do you know?
I don't even know what you're talking about.
Zima, wasn't it like an alcohol-free beer?
No, I think it was not even. It was like a sweet alcoholic beverage or something.
Well,
I don't even know.
Yeah, no.
I sort of know that it exists. Like I know Ace of Base exists. I know Zima exists. That's about it.
Oh, I know Ace of Base exists, and I know more about Ace of Base than even that. They were Nazis.
So you know what's crazy about that? That was like in middle school. There were two stories that everybody repeated, and one was that Lauryn Hill said that she would prefer her children starve than white people buy her music, which there's no videotape of her saying that, unfortunately. And the other was Ace of Base are Nazis, and it turns out 50% of the middle school rumor mill.
Also, Marilyn Manson was the main, or was the nerdy kid from the Wonder Years or something like that.
Oh, I don't remember that. Was he?
No.
No. Too bad.
Anyway, Noisy did an article on it in 2013.
But is it just? It wasn't all of them. It was one guy.
Before he founded Ace of Base, Ulf Ekberg.
No, that's already an untrustworthy name.
Was a neo-Nazi skinhead. Did Ekberg use Ace of Base's success and his opportunity to erase his neo-Nazi past? Yeah, I don't know.
Well, thank God they didn't get successful now. He would be an opportunity to enhance his neo-Nazi politics.
You go back to I Saw the Sign, and it's just a giant swastika in the music video, and it's like, we should have saw this coming, guys.
We should have seen this. They're a great band. They do great work. Griscom, anything you want to throw on the docket?
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in talking about the corruption issue around Zuma, because what we've seen is while people have been trying to, come after Zuma Zuma's corruption was pretty ridiculous. I mean,
right.
He put a swimming pool in his backyard and claimed that, and had the government pay for it, claiming that it was it was protected from fires.
It was protected from fires. It was security. He built an amphitheater and a swimming pool, and he said they were security enhancements.
But
like that's like just
it's pretty next level.
And by the way,
stuff.
and this is not like Lula stuff.
Well,
this is like actual documented.
And
like,
the corruption there too, though, is when you look at oftentimes when you have these anti-corruption drives, it's not been something that's been really focused on, making the government work better for the people.
Right.
Right. It's very much has been, oh no, this is making us look bad to international investors, and they're not going to want to give us capital because they're afraid we're going to spend it poorly. Right. And that's very important to recognize too. It's like oftentimes even these anti-corruption drives, there's always a second motive behind them, and you should be aware of that.
100%. Speaking of which, let's get to the shout out.
The shout out. Creepy.
DJ Danarchy is working on some new Alex Jones work, by the way. DJ Danarchy, I should give more props to. He is the sonic mastermind of the entire TMBS experience.
Yeah, all the music you hear pretty much, and we sometimes throw the old Lapaco track.
Lapaco's also great.
He was the original theme. Artist,
right.
But DJ Danarchy, everybody.
Danarchy and Chris Lapaco. By the way, Vic Viana in studio. He's going to be
he's in studio and on Twitter.
Very much on Twitter, and also he's coming on board for the snazzy video illicit histories that we're working on for Comrade and above patrons, and then we're going to kind of gradually seed them out because we want as many people to see them as possible. About a year ago, April 7th of 2018, Luis Inácio Lula da Silva turned himself in to authorities in Brazil. Now, we're going to play this video that was released several months ago. It features Danny Glover and Mark Weisbrot, and it was released by it's a YouTube channel, Senator Bernie Sanders YouTube channel. I think that is some official Sanders channel, but I'm not entirely sure, to be honest. It's certainly not his campaign channel, but I think it was connected to his office. I talk about this a lot. We've done several videos on this and histories. We're keeping up with the current onslaught of abuse from the Bolsonaro regime in Brazil, its connections to Trump, and also the fact that the wheels are coming off. Also the fact that Western capital interests were profoundly critical and important in ushering the clown fascism of the tropics to power in the form of Bolsonaro, and all of the assaults from indigenous people, which of course is in their interest because of the logging and mining, logging interests and oil interests, but also things that, I'm sure the editorial page of the Wall Street Journal, which endorsed him, might frown upon, like the persecution of the LGBTQ community. Well, they bear a responsibility for absolutely all of it. We're going to play a little bit of this video just to kind of get everybody up to speed again. This presents it pretty effectively. Let's check it out.
The threat to the democracy in Brazil is a result of the enormous achievements of the Workers' Party.
Brazil has an election on October 7th, and this is a very big election for a number of reasons. This one is a really unusual election because, first of all, the most popular candidate, the former President Lula da Silva, is in jail, and he would have won the election by all the polls if he had been allowed to run.
In the first decade of the 21st century, they reduced poverty, they had a vibrant economy, they extended their relationship with other countries in Latin America.
The Workers' Party was first elected to the presidency with Lula in 2002, and then he was re-elected, and then he could only serve 2 consecutive terms. And so in 2010, one of his ministers, Dilma Rousseff, ran, and she won, and then she won again in 2014. Now that period was a very successful period for social and economic progress in Brazil. And then in 2015, there was a recession, and the right-wing opposition parties to Dilma, who was in office, took advantage of that, and they impeached her. They didn't really have a crime. They accused her of a kind of an accounting manipulation, which all previous presidents had done, and governors too. It was a power grab, but then they still had the problem that Lula could run for president. So with a very politicized judiciary, they went after Lula, and he was convicted of taking a bribe, which was in the form of repairs to an apartment, basically. And they never showed that he owned or stayed in the apartment or rented it, or that it was his in any legal way. They didn't have any material evidence either.
We have to do something about this. But we at the same time understand that this is not only just happening in Brazil, it's being undermined in other countries in the region as well. The question about what has happened to all of these governments in the region who introduced policies that were more friendly to poor people and friendly to indigenous people. What is happening to those particular countries, and certainly those leaders who initiated those really progressive changes.
So that actually does a pretty good job of outlining the basic facts of the case there. As I say, objectively, and Perry Anderson, the historian writing in the London Review of Books, said that, in his phrase, I'll paraphrase, arguably Lula is the most successful president of the 21st century. I would say he certainly is, if our metric is human well-being, which is the metric of this show. No one has that sort of comparable base of massive poverty reduction, but also just sort of general opening of democracy and also strategic position of a country. On April 7th, there's going to be protests across Brazil, but there's also an effort to have solidarity protests across the world, certainly Latin America, but also the United States and Europe. I think we have, do we have that link, Matt? Oh, yeah. It's a website. I'll tweet it out again later, but people can also check it out. It's the Committee to Free Lula website, with both the facts of the case, which is important, as well as broader information on how you can take action with these demonstrations as well. Now, what we're doing with this is, first of all, the political imprisonment of Lula is a doorway to understand the whole broader crisis of Brazil, the relationship between it and the United States, the story of the coup and removal of Dilma, the total failure of press outlets like the New York Times and the Guardian. As always, you need to be reading Brazil Wire and Brian Mayer, who we regularly deal with, in order to understand this story. And then what we're also doing is we're hoping to lay the groundwork so that an administration of, of course, someone like a real progressive like Bernie Sanders might take serious diplomatic action on this, both in the case of Lula as a political prisoner, but of course more broadly in terms of restraining corporate interests here that are doing things and supporting a regime in Brazil that is not only a threat to all people of color, LGBTQ, indigenous, and workers and poor in Brazil, but through the effects of, as an example, clear-cutting the Amazon, in fact, a threat from an ecological perspective to the entire planet, aided and abetted by U.S. administrations, the Wall Street Journal, and our corporate sector. So when we protest, that's laying a broader groundwork. And I would also request, if you have an opportunity to ask a candidate a question, and you're moved to, ask them about what they will do about Bolsonaro, what they will do to free Lula as a political prisoner. All right, it's pitch time. Guys, Griscom, do a little pitch here, buddy. Go for it.
Yeah,
First, we're going to talk about the live show. We have that up on screen, the Bootleg Theater, April 20th.
Keep it simple.
Yeah, we're getting ready
That's
for
good
LA.
advice. That's right.
It's going to be a lot of
Keep it
fun.
simple.
Definitely try to get your tickets as soon as you can, because I've been seeing that they've actually been, we've had a little uptick recently.
They have, yep.
And, hell, man, I'm super excited to come and meet all of y'all. You guys are definitely going to want to come out. We got Nando Villa, we got Big Waz, Anna Kasparian of the Young Turks. It's going to be a really good time. We do so much content on this show that you get the illicit histories, theory videos, and also just lots of extra bonus content each week. There's a huge community on the Discord that you definitely want to join in. We're really working on trying to make that backlog more and more accessible. I was flying all day today, and I would have loved to have been able to take a deep dive into all of the content that we have out there. I mean, we literally have months and months of stuff for folks. So definitely join and become a patron as soon as possible.
We have histories of everything from Jamaican gang warfare and politics, intros to great thinkers like C.L.R. James, the actual mechanics of the transition out of apartheid, an illicit history of the Russian Revolution, an illicit history of why we don't have single-payer government health care in the United States. And this is just scratching the surface. What is the HDP, the Kurdish Social Democratic Party in Turkey? Its leaders are political prisoners of the Erdogan regime, but they're also mapping a whole new politics for the Middle East, plus the post games.
Have we shared the document with all the illicit histories?
We're going to do that next week. Some of our patrons put together an incredible document outlining all of them. And it really is. I mean, it is legit. It is the outlines of a full global political education.
Yeah.
And we're only going to keep going deeper and deeper.
We've done way more content than I think Patreon is ready for a podcast to do. And so it's very difficult to sort through it. So thanks to our patrons who...
It's an incredible community, which is another huge advantage.
And also, really, if you're sitting on the outside and you're not a patron, you really don't know how deep this show goes, and you really should give it a shot and check it out.
Absolutely. You're only scratching the surface. But we're
deep.
very proud of the show.
It's a deep state.
It's so deep. It's a deep state. Patreon.com/TMBS. Patreon.com/TMBS. Of course, if you're watching on YouTube, click the subscribe button. Share the videos. You can also, of course, subscribe on iTunes. Throw us a review there. But first and foremost, patreon.com/TMBS, and get your tickets to LA, April 20th at the Bootleg Theater. I want to share this. We're going to call Kim Ives in a minute, but this meme is hilarious. He's a very talented fan, as all of our fans are, that I follow on Twitter, and he tweeted this meme out. Did you watch King of the Hill, Griscom?
Of course I did.
Of course you did. Naturally. I never watched it, actually, but it seems pretty... I like Michael
it's
Judge.
good. They're all on Hulu now, so...
I'll check it out. All right, so this is at... What is his first... What's his... @_ Aaron, respect for the underscore, _447. All right, and then for people will see this, but if you're listening, I'll outline it for you. So that's Hank, right?
Yeah, Hank Hill.
All right, Hank Hill goes in... What's his son name?
Bobby.
Bobby. So he goes, "What you listening to, son?" So that's kind of how he sounds, right? Yeah. And then what does Bobby sound like? Can anybody do a Bobby impression? I don't know the show. All right. It's the Michael Brooks Show, Dad. It's a leftist podcast that promotes strategic thinking and understanding of historical context. And he likes Dipset. That's a great bumper for the show. Hank is listening to the show. He looks very disturbed. He takes the headphones off and he goes, "Boy, that Nelson Mandela sure does make a lot of sense. I'll tell you what." That's awesome. All right, guys, we're going to take a brief break, and we will be right back with Kim Ives. Welcome back to the Michael Brooks Show. Joining us now is Kim Ives. He is the English language contributing editor for Haiti Liberte. Kim, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you, Michael. Good to be with you.
So, Kim, you have this piece that we're going to get to in The Intercept that you co-wrote with Matthew Cole in a minute. U.S. mercenaries arrested in Haiti were part of a half-baked scheme to move $80 million for an embattled president. But before we get there, we've been covering, to the extent it's possible on this show, both the fact that there is has been a serious uprising in Haiti, the fact that this is an uprising that implicates the entire political order there in the sense that we can understand it, and of course then implicates the ongoing colonial extractive U.S. relationship, Canadian relationship to Haiti, and everything from finance to sweatshop labor to all sorts of other areas of the inequities and structural hierarchies of that relationship. Can you bring us up to speed on what's happening in Haiti now from the perspective of those movements and the broader political economic situation there?
Well, the big picture is that Haiti has been in a crisis for a while, but it's really become acute in these last few months. The crisis was really forestalled for a decade or so by, ironically, the Venezuelan government of Hugo Chavez, who provided Haiti back in 2006. It wasn't actually sort of implemented until 2008 with a thing called the Petro-Caribe Accord, whereby Haiti got cheap oil and great credit to pay it back. It only had to pay 60% up front and 40% was payable over 25 years at 1% interest. So this was a tremendous boon to Haiti, and this fund that 40% went into became just an ATM for the government to meet a lot of its needs. And this was Chavez's vision, was that we have to break the back of the Bretton Woods framework, where it's the IMF and World Bank and Inter-American Development Bank and USAID, which give the neo-colonies all their capital with lots of strings attached, and instead have South-South cooperation and have Haiti begin to be able to decide its own destiny and its own path of development. Well, unfortunately, Chavez's coup, we could say, was met by Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton's coup, and they brought into power in 2010, about 2 years after the accord went online, the regime of Michel Martelly, who was a neo-devaluerist and very U.S.-centric, and began to essentially plunder this fund, and about $2 billion disappeared. So,
can you just give us two? So one, we've talked about on the show, but give us again just a quick definition of when you say he was a neo-devaluerist, and then also very specifically, what role did Hillary Clinton? She's Secretary of State then. That's clear, but then also Bill Clinton. What role did they play in the Martelly government rising to power? And is this the WikiLeaks disclosures from the time that we know this about? Like what's the basis for that?
Well, yeah, some of it came out via WikiLeaks, which when they provided Haiti Liberte with the 2000 documents which were Haiti related. But just to define devaluerist, Jean-Claude Duvalier left power in 1986, 33 years ago. his father, Francois Papadoc Duvalier, and Jean-Claude, who was known as Baby Doc, ruled Haiti for about 3 decades, from 57 to 86, with iron fists. They had a very effective dictatorship whose eyes, ears, and fists were the Tonton Macoutes, a paramilitary force of some renown internationally. And the regime was run out of town in 86, and Jean-Bertrand Aristide was then elected in 1990, 5 years later. And that began a period of what we could say Haiti's first steps towards democracy, but they were immediately met with coups d'etats and military occupations from the U.S. primarily. So the tail end of this, 33 years, of course we're skipping over this pretty fast, was the tail end of this 2.5 decade, we could call it democratic chapter, even though it was interrupted by coups d'etat, had Hillary Clinton essentially come down and intervene in the elections that were decided by a president called René Preval, who had been sort of an Aristide ally at some point, and was sort of Aristide light, if you will. And he had his sort of protege in the runoff in 2010. Hillary Clinton came down on January 30th, 2011, right in the middle of the Arab Spring, and read him the Riot Act and said, you got to take your guy out and put Michel Martelly in, which, as was his wont, Preval did. All during that period leading up to that, Bill Clinton had been more or less the commissar of Haiti, as the bursar, if you will, the treasurer of the $13 billion which the world gave Haiti after the 2010 earthquake. So the two of them were very instrumental in bringing the Martelly regime into power. Right. And as I say, this Martelly regime ended up being the government that basically chopped the legs out from under the Petro-Caribe vision that Hugo Chavez had had. So to bring it back up to the current time, Martelly, using, in fact, money from the Petro-Caribe Fund, gets his protege into power. That's a guy called Jovenel Moïse, who is the current president. And Jovenel proceeds much along the same lines, basically a corrupt mafia, a clown mafia, I call it, plundering the state coffers. But at the same time, Donald Trump has come into power, and Trump, one of the first things he does with his neo-con group is to slap sanctions on Venezuela. Well, pretty soon, by the end of 2017, Moïse came in February of 2017. By October, November, Haiti could no longer, or at least had a good excuse not to, if they could no longer pay Venezuela any funds because of the blockage that the sanctions put on getting money to Venezuela. So essentially, by the beginning of 2018, the Petro-Caribe deal was done. Mm-hmm. And now a new boss steps in, and that is the International Monetary Fund. And they, of course, have a much different vision than Hugo Chavez. And they say to Moïse, listen, you got to slash your state payrolls, you've got to hike the gas price, and you have to squeeze the people. Right. And essentially they tried to do that last July, and that was really the beginning of this latest 10-month period now. We're going to the 10th month of uprisings, because they tried to hike gas prices up to 50% last July. The people went into the streets. They shut the country down. 3 days, nothing was happening. Schools, businesses, everything was closed. And basically it's been at least one, or sometimes two, three, or four huge demonstrations every month. And the latest one came in February when the anniversary of Jean-Claude's departure, February 7th, is usually the date. But this came after the Jovenel Moïse government really put a cherry on top of the sundae by stabbing a knife in the back of the Venezuelans. They given Haiti $4.3 billion of oil revenue, and they voted Washington, the Organization of American States, what Cuba aptly calls Washington's Ministry of Colonial Affairs, against Nicolas Maduro, saying he was illegitimate. Here's Nicolas Maduro, who gets 70% of the vote, being called illegitimate by Jovenel Moïse, who had less than 20% of the vote, and even that was extremely controversial. I mean, less than 20% of the electorate came out to vote for him.
So I'm saying, so basically, even if you were to dispute, and I have no, I mean, frankly, my position on Venezuela in opposition to a coup and interference there does not hinge on this one way or another. My opinions of Maduro might, but I just want to underline that even if you were to accept the view that Maduro's last election was irregular in the parlance, it would still be on a spectrum of irregularity where President Moïse is much more extreme in terms of questionable outcome. Okay, got it. Go ahead.
Exactly. Yeah. So, but essentially, the Haitian people who are totally opposed to Washington's campaign against Maduro in Venezuela are up in arms about that. And so this made the uprising that began on February 7th very strong and sharp. And for 10 days, basically, the Haitian government was, the country of Haiti was, in the words of the demonstrators, locked down. Yeah. And there was nothing happening. And everybody thought that Moïse would go. But essentially, since they've towed the line with Washington and become, one of Trump's lackeys, he, in fact, was invited at the end of last month to go to Mar-a-Lago with the other Caribbean countries that voted in favor of Pence's OAS resolution. Ever since then, there's been a constant stream of U.S. Officials going to Haiti, making all kinds of promises, saying, let's have dialogue. So now, essentially, we're in a period of sort of reconfiguration. The prime minister, and we can get to that when we talk about the mercenaries too, was ousted. And there's a new prime minister, and there's really a reformulation in the opposition. So we're in a period where it's kind of a stalemate at this point, but definitely Jovenel Moïse is on the ropes. And the IMF has given Haiti a $229 million loan over the course of the next 3 years. But it's just basically throwing good money after bad. The strings on the loan are still, you got to squeeze the people, you got to raise the gas prices, and you got to slash state budgets.
So, and yeah, let's get to the mercenaries in a second, but I just want to say really specifically, I'm sure that the primary motivation against, this president, the current Haitian regime is of course against U.S. interference in Venezuela, the history of colonial status from the United States, the World Bank and IMF. But just to underline specifically the Trump dimension, I know we shouldn't get lost in Trump and we got to talk structurally, but the notion that a government is acquiescing to a U.S. administration where the president, we all know the shithole comment about Haiti.
Right.
We know the assault on temporary status for Haitians here. That must be, I mean, at the very least, that must make incredible slogans on the street to say, wow,
absolutely,
this is the guy you bow for.
Yeah. Well, this is it. I mean, Jovenel Moïse has just whatever smidgen of credibility he had went out the window on January 10th when he voted with the U.S. at the OAS. And I think, in a way, that every uprising that I've watched over the last 30 years has had some spark that really is the last straw. So usually it's a kid being shot or killed. In this case, it's that Venezuela vote. And I think since then, and, you know, the shithole comment played a big role in it because every Haitian felt the lash of that,
Right.
As well as the TPS, 50,000 TPS Haitians who are going to be sent back, even though they keep sort of postponing that, and the courts are doing their bit to call it into question.
Right.
So all of that means that Moise's days are, to me, numbered. I really would be extremely surprised if he's able to serve out his 5-year term.
Well, that's good news, and I think that the president might have some similar inclinations you do, because several weeks ago there was a team of mercenaries that were arrested in Haiti. I remember this. I was actually in Puerto Rico at the time, not looking at much news, but I caught this story, and I was like, wow, that's some bold shit. Who were these mercenaries, and what were they doing?
Well, it turns out that they were trying to help Moise, Jovenel Moise, get his hands on $80 million of the Petrocaribe money. Now, most of the actual Petrocaribe fund that Haiti has or had in its savings account has been blown through. But there is what they call the Petrocaribe escrow account, which is where all the money which Haiti couldn't send to Venezuela is kept at the central bank. So we don't know some of the details and why they needed 8 armed foreigners to come facilitate this transfer, but somehow or another they were trying to transfer this $80 million from an account that Jovenel had to sort of handle with the prime minister, with whom he was at odds, and the bank governor, into an account that Jovenel had complete control over and didn't have to answer to anybody. So that's what we know. We know that from a source with direct knowledge of the operation. And so that's what we put out in the Intercept in Haiti Liberte on March 20th. Now, after we came out with that, one of the former SEALs who'd been in the team in Port-au-Prince.
Can you tell, just really quickly before we get to that, can you remind everybody of like who was in this team, where they were pulled over, and the types of artillery they were carrying?
Right. Yeah, let me just give the thumbnail of what happened.
That would be perfect.
So essentially on February 16th, this is the tail end of that 10-day uprising that I mentioned earlier. A private jet leaves Baltimore at 2 a.m. in the morning and lands in Port-au-Prince at 5 a.m. The 6 guys on board, mercenaries, they're carrying weapons and, assault weapons, semi-automatic rifles, pistols, knives, satellite phones, drones, etc. They come into the country without going through immigration, without going through customs, and they're met by essentially, let's call them for the moment, just cronies of Jovenel Moise. They're taken to a luxury hotel where they spend the night. The next, a couple of others come in through other means, through commercial airlines, and join them. So it's a total of 8 that are there. One of the guys got away. We can talk about that later, but it's not too important about that part. But the team is down town Port-au-Prince on the afternoon, at about 2 in the afternoon, of Port-au-Prince outside the BRH, what's called the Banque de la République d'Haïti, the Bank of the Republic of Haiti, which is this big, beautiful, modern, pillared bank rising up out of the garbage and dirt and mess that is most downtown Port-au-Prince. They proceed to try to enter the bank, but a security guard there won't let them in. Meanwhile, out on the street, their vehicles, there's about 3 of them, are sitting there, and they don't have any license plates. They've taken the license plates off. So the police come. They were apparently alerted by bank personnel, but they also saw these cars going around with no plates. And there proceeded to be a 2-hour or so standoff. They ended up arresting 7 of the guys. As I say, one escaped along with the 2 Haitians who were involved, a guy called Josué Lecomte, who lives here in Brooklyn, not too far from BAM, Brooklyn Academy of Music, in a very swank townhouse.
We're going to have him on the show next week.
Oh, that would be excellent. Yeah, if you can catch him. We tried. We staked out his house and tried to run him down. He ran into a parking garage, and then tried to slip out the side. We ran after him, but he wouldn't talk to us. We didn't want to get any assault charges against us, but he definitely tried to ignore us and run away from us. So if you can get him on the show, I'd be very interested to hear it.
We'll try.
So Josué Lecomte, who's basically sort of an American with a Haitian passport, and this other guy who was a very corrupt lower echelon official. He ran the lottery. He ran, a post for electoral affairs or something, and his name is Fritz Jean-Louis. So these 2 guys both managed to escape the scene, as did one of the former special forces, a guy called Mike Phillips. So the other 7, which was basically 5 Americans, led by a guy called Kent Croker, a former U.S. Marine pilot, 2 Navy SEALs, a guy called Christopher and another guy called Christopher McKinley, and then a guy called, 2 other fellows, a guy called Talon and another guy called Port, along with 2 Serbs, were all taken to what they call the DCPJ, the Judicial Police Quarters, down by the airport. They were given, very nice treatment and quarters there, and the U.S. Embassy immediately began to browbeat everybody, especially the chief of police, saying, release these guys, release these guys. Well, the chief of police said, listen, I can't release them. That's up to the court system. They're in the hands of the judiciary. So now the justice minister writes a letter, not to the chief of police even, to the chief of the police station there, and says, you are authorized, or I'm giving authorization to have these 7 guys released and turned over to the U.S. to stand trials for taking illegal export of weapons. Well, he had no authority to give that authority, and the police chief had no authority to release them. This could only be done by a Haitian judge, an investigating judge, who would have to look at it and give his verdict and say what was going to happen. So they just ran roughshod over the Haitian law, and then these guys were flown back and handcuffed to Miami, where they were given very cursory interviews by, I guess, the FBI, or I'm not sure which authorities yet because they haven't told us, and then released. Now, they broke U.S. laws as well, because when you travel abroad, especially with semi-automatic rifles, etc., you're supposed to get a permit. You're supposed to get a license. You can't just bring it like you bring your cell phone. You gotta tell the ATF about that. But they did not, and they're not being charged for that. So they violated U.S. and Haitian laws, Haiti's most egregiously. And at this point, we're continuing to look into it. There was a second contract which was far, far more serious than even the grand theft that I just explained that they had. It involved mortal crimes, and but we're still investigating that one. But the long and short of it is we do know from, again, the source with direct knowledge that they were trying to help Moise get his hands on this $80 million to use as he wants.
But there was a potential, you can't say more, but just to be clear, there's a potential additional contracts that involved, as you said, like mortal, much more serious things than even grand theft. So as a final part of this, and I hope you'll come back on the show, but I mean, just two quick follow-ups on this to conclude. One, do we know, like, are these guys just a sort of band that was assembled, or are they actually part of some security company that does this kind of work? There's a lot of firms like this that shade those boundaries. I mean, obviously Blackwater is kind of the most famous example of this, but they worked with, direct U.S. support in Iraq and Afghanistan. And they also, in fact, I mean, people know about the Nisour Square massacre in Iraq. And then more broadly, has this been another symptom of the sort of the new version of colonial politics in Haiti? Does it involve a lot of security subcontractors from these mercenary firms carrying out the will of, U.S. institutions or corrupt politicians? Those are my final two for you.
Right. Well, a couple of things. One, there's a lot of rumors that there are other mercenary teams functioning in Haiti. The Haitian people believe that a number of the demonstrators, up to 40 demonstrators, according to a recent human rights report, were killed over that 10-day period that I mentioned in February. And many were shot in the head. They believe they were snipers, that they were, shot similar to what we've seen happen to demonstrators in other countries, Syria and Venezuela, etc., by essentially mercenary snipers in many cases. So there's a feeling there were other teams, particularly in the south, in the town of Okai, which were supposedly functioning. So we don't know. But this particular team appears to have been a pickup group. It doesn't have an overall directing organization other than Croker Security. The head guy, as I said, is a guy called Kent Croker, a former C-130 Marine pilot who runs a kind of security outfit with his father out in California. So he apparently put the team together, which was drawn from different corners: Texas, Louisiana, Virginia, the Washington, D.C. area.
And Serbia.
The two Serbs are both U.S. residents working for an outfit called, if I recall, K-17 or something, K-17, which is in the Washington area. And people can also read more about sort of the nitty-gritty of a lot of that. A lot of the detail was in a piece done by Jake Johnston from the Center for Economic and Policy Research down in Washington. It's called Our Boss Will Call Your Boss, which was one of the lines they apparently told the cops when they were being arrested during the standoff. The other main thing I'd like to say, Michael, is that I think there may well have been some kind of U.S. collusion, to use a word that's been bandied around a lot this past couple of years, or involvement in the operation. It may not have just been a purely Haitian affair,
right?
Because the the fact that these guys were just let off so completely, and one of the theses we're working with is, did the Trump administration have some kind of knowledge of this and say, well, whatever helps prop up Moise is good for us, so let them do it, and give them a wink and a nod or even a green light. Right. So we're still digging on a lot of these fronts. Of course, everybody's clammed up about it. It's very hard to find anybody. I've been, hounding the central bank people who are all totally mum, and even the people who might talk to us, like the security guard, are afraid for their lives, because that's what happens in a place like Haiti. You die if you talk. So, we're working, and we hope to get something more soon.
But just to clarify that in like the last 30 seconds, like if these guys were just there to make some money and do this for a Haitian president, then I don't think it would be like a priority for somebody in the United States to prosecute that. But if it just like fell in their lap and it was already an embarrassing, messy story to begin with, like why wouldn't they?
Right.
And the obvious reason might be that there was some instigation there, or at least informal coordination with like the Trump administration. I mean, and I know you're not saying that, but that's what you're speculating. That makes a lot of sense.
Right, speculating. I mean, it could all just go back to Trump's shithole comment, and he just says, the place is a shithole, we're not going to bother. Because these are all sort of mini Trumps, they're all kind of right-wing gun guys. And, that's Trump's
They're probably
thing,
more fit than Trump, though. You got to give them that.
Right, a little, but
a little.
Some of them had a little punch. I mean, these guys were not top drawer, huh? Right. But they, nonetheless, I think, it may be chalked up to the fact that the Trump administration sees them as some kind of quote unquote victims of a something gone wrong, and aren't pursuing them for that reason. But it could be something much more.
Kim Ives, I really appreciate your time. He is the English editor of Haiti Liberte. Kim, look forward to having you on again sometime soon.
Thanks a lot, Michael.
Appreciate it. All right, guys, here's what we're going to do. David Griscom, have you recovered from your jet lag, buddy? Doing all right?
Yeah, I've had some coffee. Hey man, I was up at 4 today. Yeah, I'm ready to go.
The testosterone flowing.
All right, man. What do you got? And then we'll get to Malaika Jabali. She's entered the studio.
Yeah, I just wanted to circle back on a story from last month where we saw that we've talked about this before on the show when it was getting close to happening, but the yield curve inverted last month. So the 3-month yield curve dipped above the 10-year yield curve, which is significant because basically it means that the people who are investing money, they're more willing to park their money into an investment for 10 years, even though it's getting a less return than a short-term 3-month investment. And that's very significant because it basically, it implies a lack of confidence in the market. And it's also something that people watch very closely because the last 7 recessions have all been preceded by a yield curve inversion. But you don't just have to go to the yield curve to see bad omens in the U.S. economy. The Fed cut their growth forecast for next year just last month as well. And in February, too, 7 million Americans were 3 months or more behind in their car payments. And it's one of these things where we're seeing the tightening monetary policy that's coming from the Fed. But we're also dealing with the fact that there's such a large amount of corporate debt that has been propping up the growth in the U.S. economy. And it's going to be a significant problem if the Federal Reserve wants to normalize its monetary policy after years of very loose and cheap money. And basically, since the crisis, we've had the Fed using monetary policy to buoy the fortunes of the wealthy and to create growth for corporate profits. It's very telling when you see what this money has been used for. It has been used for increasing, the working conditions of people, or even really any kind of significant innovation. It has been primarily used, one, for stock buybacks, and two, most money that's being spent internally has been to shore up more intellectual property. So basically a way for these...
What are we talking? Are we talking pharmaceutical property, software?
All across the board, software, techniques, and basically...
So it's the same dynamic of there's shrinking material resources to primitively accumulate and turn into profit centers. So you need to either go to, as I said, a place like Africa that has some untapped areas to just freshly, utterly decimate and exploit. That's why there's like a neo-colonial game there. Or to create more and more and more abstraction and exoticization of financial instruments.
And you can pull in rents, and you look
this
at
type of thing, for rent economy. Right?
And then you look at basically a lot of the innovation that we've seen recently has been a way to find already existing economic activity, and then to find a way to extract from it. And this is just one of these things that we're going to be seeing a lot more tightness when it comes to the finance behind these corporations. When we're talking about companies, we talk about a lot of these Silicon Valley companies. They are pretty much propped up by just money that's flowing into them. They're not making a profit themselves. So as we see this, the growth that came basically out of the recession came out of like loose monetary policy. And as we see that start to tighten up, we're going to start seeing more issues. Let's not to mention, Trump's trade war with China, Brexit, and the abysmal state of the EU economy. And just, as one last thing to sort of highlight this, Lyft's IPO flop. I don't know if anybody saw this.
I was celebrating.
Yeah.
I was happy to see that.
But it's been 3 days of straight losses. And, there's a lot of reasons that could be happening. But it's also probably that a lot of people are realizing that this business model that Lyft has had is not something that's necessarily worth jumping into, especially because the only reason that it's been able to succeed has been because there's been just such an amount of money that's just flown into the company, regardless of its actual, material and what's going on the ground in this economy. So,
are you talking down the economy right now?
I'm talking down the economy a little bit. I'm sorry.
There's a lot of negativity. That's not going to help. I just want to say for people, just to be really clear, being a patron is a very smart use of financial resources at times of
that's something to be loose with.
What did you say?
Be loose with your money there.
Yeah.
It won't get
Gold and Patreon.
It might not get you an iron grip on the future of transportation apps or coordination, but
yeah,
it's still good.
But at least you'll understand why you're in the recession. And, have some tasteless Nelson Mandela jokes. We're going to take a brief break, and then Malaika Jabali is going to join us. Her new piece in The Intercept, Hillary Clinton is deeply confused about what happened in Wisconsin. Now, even me, when I saw the first half of that, I'm just like, all right, can Hillary Clinton just go away and she can be wrong? But then the second half is, but here's why that matters. So unfortunately, this fucking woman still being wrong matters for us. And the great Malaika is going to break it down and help us understand how we win in 2020. We'll be back in a minute. Welcome back to the Michael Brooks Show. Joining us now is returning champion, Malaika Jabali. She is a writer, an attorney, and an activist with opinions.
I have
Malaika,
opinions.
Thanks for being back.
Thanks for having me again.
So the last time you were on, and this is definitely a patron treat, you hit us with some Biggie impressions in the post game.
I don't think so.
Can you just?
I gotta roll.
You know the improv concept of say yes.
It's been a while.
All right,
Just
all right.
off my improv chops.
So, anyways, Malaika did some great Biggie impressions, and we were going to follow up with more, but you actually requested that we tee off on Beto O'Rourke instead.
Yeah.
Now, we have some sound of him, but why do you? I kind of. For me, he might be the least likable of anybody running for president, but why do you find him so annoying? I'm curious.
I mean, obviously he's not coherent. So half the time I don't even understand what he's saying.
Right.
And so I think that typifies like the state of politics right now, where Nancy Pelosi can just do a clap and everyone is just like falling all over themselves. He is like the epitome of the clap, but we just get a lot more. Sorry.
He's the clap as a
Hand
man. Okay, wait, no,
gestures.
let me see this actually. But I feel like, okay, the hands, yeah.
Yeah. So
they're more
that's
jerky
just
though.
is
Your
it?
hands are still like, you're still doing, like, he does a lot of this. He's very noodly.
More flailing.
He's flail. That's what's incredible, is that what passes for charisma in 2019 in the United States is a guy who is doing literally a West Wing TED Talk mashup with arms like Gumby. And people are like, this is fucking like Kennedy. All right, let's check out Beto O'Rourke. Well, maybe he'll sway you here, Malaika. This was him. He has a vision that he's talking about at the We the People Summit. See, she's already laughing, even though we're just setting up the clip. Much. All right, are we ready for this, Matt? Yeah, I'm ready. All right, let's check out some. All right, Beto O'Rourke.
I'll sign an executive order on the first day in office requiring every single cabinet secretary to hold a town hall meeting like this every single month, to listen to you and to be accountable to you so that we deliver for you.
Malaika, a change of opinion?
What are we delivering? I don't know. Like, there's just no coherence. I don't know what he's talking about.
We're delivering enthusiasm.
Oh, sorry.
What are we delivering, Briscoe?
We're delivering enthusiasm. We're delivering hope. We're delivering innovation.
Change.
Art. And the fact is
stop
that we have to leave for our children a better day than we had today.
You literally are doing an Obama impression, your Beto impression, which in a way is the perfect
That's how you do a Beto impression.
Yeah, it's too flattering to Beto, though. Like,
he's
like, in these times, there's something about him that it's like he can hear. It's like he's got a little earbud that is playing the like inspirational music they're going to put on.
Chariots of Fire music is running in his head.
If we don't grasp this opportunity right now, we may never get another chance to grasp it. It's just
the opportunity for your kids and mine yesterday and tomorrow.
Yesterday. He had an opportunity yesterday.
Exactly. Do you guys know those those black posters that have like the inspirational quote on the bottom, or just like motivation?
Yes,
that's Beto.
That's him as a person.
Yes.
Also, like, just as in terms of like baseless speculation, I've been in some environments where there was a lot of cocaine use, and I'm not saying that. And in some ways, he's way more positive than a typical. Although his campaign stump is like the first hour of a party where a lot of coke is going around. Like when people are in a good mood and they're talking about business projects that will never happen. Mm-hmm. He's like in that mode.
Oh shit! You just I'm triggered. Not from cocaine, but similar things.
Just the wholesome part. All right, we have more Beto.
Well, I think it's interesting that he feels forced to say things like reference the first progressive era. Like he has some sort of like somehow the political moment is getting through. So here's him talking about sort of like going back to Teddy Roosevelt.
All right, well, wait. It's okay. So can we give him a fair hearing now? It sounds like he's talking about something real, Malaika. Let's check this out.
Let's check it out.
All right, yeah. Let's
roll the tape.
Exactly.
We've never had these kinds of challenges in the lifetimes of anyone in this auditorium.
Pause it. Honestly, too much hand movement. I'm not even being petty now. Like, legitimately, whatever his thing is working for some people. He's raised a lot of money, but this is objectively too much hand movement. When I first started going on TV, I had to watch because I use too much hand movement. Like, it's an actual thing, and he needs to stop.
Hey, RFK was bad at when he first got on the stump too. So.
You know what? If this guy came out and quoted Aeschylus and had multiple members of his family be killed, I would cut him more slack.
Anyone in this auditorium, regardless of how young or how old you are, this economy, this unprecedented concentration of wealth and power and privilege, we haven't seen since the last true progressive era that Senator Klobuchar referred to that produced Teddy Roosevelt and some extraordinary progressive reforms. A healthcare system where people are dying of diabetes and the flu and curable cancers in the year 2019 in the wealthiest, the most powerful country on the face of the planet.
Now he's copying Bernie.
I don't know. This is like the tag cloud that you see in blogs, and it's just words. And then
you mean like one of those like projections from like what were the words used at the seminar most this week?
Yeah,
progressive, cancer.
That's how you. That's how you write a Beto speech. Is you get that word cloud, and then you have one of Beto's staffers like draw lines through the words you can say without getting in trouble.
It's just like Israel.
Like,
no.
Don't stay away from
Yeah,
that
erase
one.
that shit.
Go right to progressive era.
Yeah.
That's safe.
Ilhan
Teddy.
Omar.
Yeah,
No.
Teddy Roosevelt.
Yeah, Teddy Roosevelt.
Diabetes.
Diabetes. You know, and I want to say too that like Obama, obviously, I just have different politics than Obama, but like Obama would give a speech that had a structure to it, and its conclusion would be like, yeah, I don't buy that. But it was like,
Yeah.
we started here, now we're going here, and the conclusion is we should talk to pharma lobbyists or whatever. Sorry to be petty. But this dude only does conclusions. Like, you need to build up for your payoff. You can't, like, you have to have the 10 minutes behind you to be like, and that is why I know. You can't come out and be like, I believe this so fundamental. Like, what do you believe? What are you talking about?
What's the this?
Right.
I don't know. That just leaves him very open to make it whatever he wants to be, which I feel like is a part of like the issue. I think that's part of the strategy is you don't want to really pin down your precise policies so you can be a little bit more flexible.
Because they're
the
bad.
donor class.
Because they're bad. Like, anytime he gets specific, they're not good. Right? Like, anytime you push him, he's like, well, yeah, I don't support Medicare for all. Like, basically.
Yeah.
I find Buttigieg more annoying than him, though.
I actually haven't paid much attention to that.
I just find why people like him annoying. Like, there was a
Okay.
piece that came out in Jacobin today about how, like, the woman that you keep saying we should have on the show.
Eliza Featherstone.
We should have her on the show. I like this piece because she's just like, all of the media coverage about this guy is just that he's smart. Like this like the return of like the cult of smartness, right? Like, it doesn't matter what. I mean, he is more substantive than Beto for sure, because he actually says some things. But everything that people write about him are just like, he speaks Norwegian.
Yeah,
He
I
went
have
to
heard
Harvard.
that. That's cool.
See, that's cool.
That's what I know.
But is that cool though?
To speak Norwegian.
I think we need to return to a time where it's not cool.
Michael's getting very anti-intellectual.
I'm very yes, I am.
It sounded like you were anti-Norwegian. I'm like, what's your beef with that?
It's a shithole country.
Okay.
I have no. Actually, in fact, I have a lot of patrons from Norway. No joke. I have no beef with Norway. But it started with the scientists. I don't like scientists, and now it's like expanding out to all.
How's that working out? Like,
great.
Okay.
That's fine. I don't get burdened by like vaccinations don't cause autism. I don't want to hear that shit.
But climate change.
Well, climate change I believe in because it instinctually makes sense to me. So I don't need the science.
Okay.
I'm just trusting my gut on that one.
Climate change, cool. Vaccinations, not cool.
Right. And then
All
the
right.
HIV AIDS link, we'll see.
TBD.
Yeah, TBD, exactly. That would actually be really funny to be like the legitimately like anti-science left-wing pundit show. Just like, I'm going to interview Thabo and Becky's herbalist.
It kind of
about
sounds
AIDS
lucrative,
next
to
week.
be honest.
It actually does sound pretty lucrative. But what did Hillary Clinton say about why she lost Wisconsin, first of all? And just real quick, like,
Yeah.
I know I said before, like, I don't like her, obviously, but I think people think about her too much. So why, like, I know you're not just trying to insult the woman. So what's the relevance of her intervening in a way that's inaccurate?
Well, it started because she was invited to give a speech at a bloody Sunday anniversary. So in Selma, Alabama, there was on a Sunday service basically to honor civil rights activists. Dr. King was a part of this like major kind of a seminal juncture in the civil rights movement where they were attempting to cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge on their way to Montgomery, to the Capitol, to lobby for the Voting Rights Act. So they had this act already in place the previous year, but they needed to lobby for it so that state and local governments would actually implement it so they can enforce this law.
Right.
So she gets to this church. So the church where she conducts the speech was the kind of the headquarters for the protesters. That's where they started the march. So first of all, she ended up basically making it about her. So she jumped It was just
This is why it is so hard.
And this was just
to
in
be
March.
classy to Hillary Clinton, because it's only Hillary Clinton could be like, and as I reflect on this day, I would just like to say that whether you were killed registering voters or were misled by Robbie Mook, I feel you.
It was just so many layers of fuckery, and I'm like, Hillary girl, like we're trying to forget you, but you're coming onto the stage, this huge platform, to A, make it about yourself, and then B, spew inaccuracies.
Okay.
So
what are the inaccuracies?
The first one was saying that she lost Wisconsin because, and she kind of used a little bit more. It wasn't, I'm paraphrasing a bit, but the bottom line is that she tried to say that in Wisconsin she lost because of voter suppression. And we need to fight voter suppression because, these are the ways that we're still having, the same sorts of laws apply, 50 years later.
Right.
And we're going to need the same sort of energy, the same sort of public display of protest in 2020 as we did, in 1964. And she said that Wisconsin ended up the voter suppression laws that was passed in 2011 actually was a result of the Shelby v. Holder.
The gutting of the Voting Rights Act.
Right, exactly.
That the Roberts Court did. What year was that? Like 2007?
That was 2012. So it was.
Oh, so they actually gutted it after Wisconsin put.
Yes.
Okay, got it.
Right.
Okay.
So she tried to act as if that was the cause of the voter suppression law in the state.
I see. So her timelines
But the law
are off.
So the law passed first of all. She was referring to Section 5, which has the pre-clearance requirements. So the law passed before that.
Pre-clearance to people.
Pre-clearance means that states that traditionally had some form of discrimination against voters had to now submit a plan, so their redistricting plan and other ways that they are going to change their their state laws to comply with the federal jurisdiction, with federal law.
Okay, got it.
So a number of states had to do that. Wisconsin, was not one of those states that needed to submit Section 5 pre-clearance rules or, their plans. And then even if it did, the law was passed before that because there wasn't the same sort of history of voter discrimination in Wisconsin as there were in a lot of southern states. New York was also included in that, though. So that was two of the inaccuracies. But then there's obviously something which, is debatable, but it's still a stretch to say that she lost 40 to 80,000 votes in Wisconsin because of this single ID law. That was a law that was passed in 2011 when Governor Scott Walker came into power.
Right. So this is a big, So again, obviously you're not saying of course they're trying to drive down the vote of people, but she's equating where she's reducing all of the variables in Wisconsin down to one thing, which there isn't much evidence for.
Yes. I mean, there's some evidence for it, but she has completely extrapolated what a study said in one city in Milwaukee. Well, actually it was Dane and Milwaukee counties to the rest of the state. And then she's also assuming that all of those people are black when Milwaukee and Dane counties are, predominantly white. Though the city of Milwaukee has a strong concentration of black people. It's probably, I would say, the plurality of the city. About 40% of the city is black. But she tried to apply all of this, what was happening in these two counties, to the rest of the state, when a number of those people could have also been white. What she also ignored in that is that even though that study says that, you could have had thousands of people affected by this law, and, I say this everywhere I go, and I've said this when I appeared on the show the last time, I care deeply about voter suppression. I'm from Georgia. I see this happening all the time. And so just to jump ahead a little bit, I contrast her statements with the actual work that Stacey Abrams has done to combat voter suppression. But going back to this study, one of the studies that she's relying on, the top two reasons why people said that they didn't vote, one of them was they just didn't like the candidates.
Right.
Another one was that they just weren't interested in the candidates. Voter suppression in that study comprised maybe 6% of the answers. The other two, which expressed some sort of just disinterest, was about 40%.
But isn't disinterest a form of suppression? Aren't you smearing Hillary Clinton?
The way that they framed the question, it was very clear that it was along the nexus of, I don't like this person. Like, I'm not interested in voting because I don't like this person.
But isn't that
or I don't
sexist to not like Hillary Clinton? Sorry. Actually, I could see this is being a Clinton media stan is not a bad gig.
Well, it doesn't, because the questions don't say, who you didn't like. It just says you didn't like the candidates.
You just had the very natural human response to look at Donald Trump and then Hillary Clinton and say, I'm not really stoked about this.
About either.
Who could have guessed that neither of those people were likable to the vast majority of Americans?
Yeah, it's almost like normal people have normal human reactions to things. Okay, so all right. But it actually, so on a personal level, though, it makes sense why Hillary Clinton would say this, because it sucks to lose to Donald Trump and be rejected by people. No, I mean, seriously, like, honestly, like, I really don't like her, but I'm like not necessarily a headshot person. Like, I think people get off too much on how much they hate her. So it's like her human reaction makes sense. But why is this a problem for us in terms of people running with this interpretation to make us misplay a place like Wisconsin again in 2020, which is going to be pivotal. Like, I can't think of a more important individual place than Wisconsin to actually beating this motherfucker.
I think a lot of it is because, well, as I talk about in the story, it downplays all the other issues that plagued her and that are plaguing the majority of Black people in Wisconsin. And 79% of Black people came out to vote in 2012 for Obama. About 47% came out in 2016. So even if we attribute some of that to voter suppression, we also have to ask why this happened. And in a city and a state that incarcerates the most Black men in the country, that has like one of the top 3 socioeconomic indicators, like, they're basically all the worst in Wisconsin for Black people than anywhere else.
Really? Huh.
Yeah. When it comes to poverty rates, when it comes to income disparities, when it comes to high school education, top 3 for Black people in Wisconsin, worse than anywhere else in the country. So we can't just be concerned about Black people when it's time for them to vote, and you're concerned about, their votes being suppressed. You also need to look at their lives and how their lives are being oppressed when it's not an election cycle. And I feel that Democrats tend to not do that. So to me, talking about voter suppression isn't just a matter of, it's we can't just take it at face value.
You have to talk about life suppression as well.
Yeah, it is. And so we can't take, I think, specifically kind of these centrist Democrats' arguments at face value when they're not doing anything to back it up any other time of the year.
Well, this is another time where Black voters are relevant, which is to go to like a really important civil rights commemoration and have a therapy session.
Yeah.
So that's the other time where maybe it's relevant to talk. So, okay, so they, and that's a really, and by the way, you pull this off really well, because that's a very tricky argument to pull off, right? Like, to actually simultaneously say, of course, voter suppression is a major thing. Of course, that's just part of Republican strategy, period. And you can correlate, I have no doubt, like, some people want to ethnically cleanse the country and deport people because they're just like racist and they feel uncomfortable with people with different skin color and food living near them. But a lot of people in the Republican coalition, I don't even necessarily, and it makes no functional difference, but they just get like, oh, that doesn't work for us demographically, so we need to suppress as many votes as possible and get as many people out of the country as possible so we have a clearer lane to win. Like, I think that is strategic. So you have to diagnose and attack that, but then also, right, like, hit Hillary Clinton for saying, no, that isn't why you lost Wisconsin.
Yeah, it's not why you lost Wisconsin, and it's also disingenuous because, we're thinking about how you can pull in people into the tent for 2020, and I'm speaking like kind of third party, not me, because I don't really care what the Democratic Party decides to do with Black voters, ultimately, because I don't align with the Democratic Party, or I would say like the establishment wing of the Democratic Party, and that's who controls the DNC. So however they want to take this information, like that's up to them. But objectively speaking, that's not what is working. Like when you're only focusing on this element of it, you're ignoring the many reasons why people decided not to come to the polls and why they may not come out in 2020 as well.
Do you think it's also really important? Like I get really frustrated just analytically when people say phrases like black vote or Jewish vote, even for that matter, or not because obviously there aren't like massive variables like that hit all black people. Of course, no one who knows anything would deny that. At the same time, and of course, like my Bernie bias is really strong here, to like the South Carolina electorate, period, not just black, is very different than Wisconsin, is very different from Flatbush, is very different from LA. And I also feel like what you're doing in your work is you're actually saying like there's multiplicity of black politics in terms of class, in terms of social policy, in terms of all of these things. And like that the Clinton wing or the centrist wing, whatever you want to call it, they have been ignoring overall and not contributing to the well-being and the aggregate of African American voters. But they also, at least in my mind, and tell me whether you agree or not, they're speaking to like super specific parts of this broader demographic and then making it, and in the media narrative, as if that's it, right? Like it isn't this broad, complicated demographic like any other. So what would it look like, I guess, like there's the broader like don't just go to black voters when you need a vote, but what would an analysis where you actually like took a second step and you started to say what are the differences here geographically, regionally, ideologically, and how to actually have, and also in terms of like the type of people that we need to bring into our campaigns, we need to bring into leadership positions, so that this is actually delivered in a much more thought out way.
Well, I think one of the things you do is you don't say that everything is great, which was the Democratic mantra in 2016. So people hear that and they're like, "Fuck you!" Like, what are you talking about? Like,
I thought, "Fuck you." I looked at my student loans and close family who were on the verge of homelessness and said that. I was on the show every day. Sorry to interrupt, but like, keep Donald Trump out. And are you fucking kidding me? Great for who?
Yeah, so that's not enough for a lot of people. And then you're seeing, I would say, even more kind of factions that have emerged amongst the black voters. So there's this whole ADOS movement, which has been sort of this digital campaign to say that whatever Democratic candidate comes before us, they need to show us tangibles. They need to say what they're actually doing specifically for black people, because when you look around, the party has not delivered. So, and that has been a very kind of a loud group that's come about, especially digitally and not necessarily in the streets. But we're just seeing more of those sort of breaks within black communities. So I think you just acknowledge that, okay, sorry, things aren't that great. But I think part of that means that you have to acknowledge that you contributed to the socioeconomic experiences that people are experiencing. So acknowledgement is obviously going to be like the first key, and then saying, okay, I know this is how black people are kind of seeing things across the board, but then in places like the Midwest, home ownership rates are much lower than they are in the South and the West. I mean, it just takes actually caring about what's happening with people's lives.
Can you talk again? Last time you touched on this, but I'd love for you to talk again about specifically in Wisconsin, the black labor tradition as another example of what you're talking about.
Yeah. So about 36% of black people, I want to say in 1983 or 1985, not 36% of black people, 36% of folks in the manufacturing sector in Milwaukee were in unions. And black people were disproportionately in the manufacturing sector, black men. About, I'm going to say 40% of the black male population at one point, I think in 1970, was in the manufacturing sector. So you have people who were able to get these, living wage, middle class jobs with nothing more than like a high school diploma. And live well. And so their reality, their understanding from their uncles and their brothers and their cousins was to be in a union. That was how you preserve these jobs in the private sector. And people forget that, the public sector unions that Scott Walker destroyed through Act 10, that was much later. That was after decades of kind of this economic downturn in Milwaukee, where they were already losing these, manufacturing jobs for a host of reasons. So you have a number of Black people who are used to hearing about collective bargaining in ways that you don't hear about in the South.
Right.
Where it's almost like a dirty word to talk about unions. Like I said, I'm from Georgia, right to work state. And the fact that Stacey Abrams even mentioned it, even though, she's kind of centrist in some ways, the fact that she even mentioned it in a red state was pretty remarkable. So being able to kind of confront the status quo is going to be important. But most establishment Democrats don't do that. They are the status quo. They'd like to maintain it.
What specifically do you think of somebody like Bernie and the relationship between the need, like, I get so annoyed personally by these debates, but if we're going to position it, universal programs versus specific programs, and how broadly something like that, what he's doing is coming across to you.
How broadly?
Like in terms of what, if you're designing a plan and a policy set that makes sense for all the intricacies you're talking about, what in practical, there's, I guess, okay, so superficially, we already know that the establishment Democrats and people like Hillary Clinton and most of the main, Julian Castro, right, went after Bernie Sanders on reparations. Now, I don't like Bernie Sanders' answers on reparations. That's fine. That's totally something to debate and argue and have out. But just like Julian Castro is obviously somebody that has no plans for anything, would never support an actual financial mechanism for reparations, and also in addition does not support things like Medicare for all. So they can kind of leverage the rhetoric of that politics to undermine these universal programs. And then conversely, I think people with social democratic or socialist politics or whatever are navigating how does it actually look to deliver universal programs that we absolutely need, at least that's my view, absolutely, things like Medicare for all, free college, and then at the same time, the specific delivery mechanisms on, reparations is the example that people go to, but I would think it would be actually a whole broad policy set. So I guess I'm just beyond I think, and I learned from reading you and others, but just that, okay, the mainstream Democrats will utilize this rhetoric to undermine radical politics. Then some people with really good politics are not as good at anticipating some of the intricacies and distinctions. What's the synthesis that we actually need to get out of that and actually deliver for people? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think one of the easiest ways to do it is just to say race, to talk about racism. I don't think the messaging has to be that complicated.
Right.
If you see something as racist, be comfortable saying that's racist. If you see that there have been universal programs that have not trickled down appropriately to Black people, say these have not historically trickled down to Black people. We need to fix that.
Right.
So I think a lot of those universal programs can be race specific simply by being specific to race. When you say that these things disproportionately affect Black people, all of those, whether it's having a universal basic income or a baby bond or healthcare, you can tie to the way that they're disproportionately affecting Black people. When we talk about home ownership and affordable housing, you can talk about Black people, in places like Wisconsin where the gap between Black and white home ownership is 40 percentage points. So just being able to say these are the way that we have applied these, these goals in our country do not trickle down appropriately to Black people because we live in a racist society. I think that could work wonders.
Right, because we don't live in an actual full democracy. This is the Bill Fletcher synthesis all the time. I feel like he's talking about, who I have on this show a lot, which is he's a Marxist, and he's always correlating you need to democratize the economy. You need to have these universal programs, and they will never function the way they need to function unless you have a democratized country. Like, that is some version of the synthesis right there. That was a great answer. Could you give it to me in a Beto O'Rourke version?
What we need for our kids and your kids.
More movement, I think.
And race and this.
Yes.
Over here.
It's coming. Yeah.
A little coaching.
All right.
Yeah.
I'm just more hand movements.
Yeah.
I just believe that this country has so many things and so many aspects. And while we can say that racism is bad, I grew up watching Eddie Murphy movies.
I like how this one just kind of controlled that one.
Yeah. I'm trying to find I can't even see the system of it, honestly. I've been trying to figure out how his hand jerks work, and I don't get it. Most other people, like Obama's pattern was, he always wanted to look very controlled, but he also had this thing like let me be clear was to cover his stammer. So he'd get on his well, I think that let me be clear, right? So there's
what are you talking? What are you complaining about? Just say thank you, please.
What?
That was one of his most asshole moments you pulled for that drop. That was literally Obama in Houston talking to oil executives, being like, I opened a lot of areas to drilling. Why are you bitching about me? Which is like, that's like vintage Obama, because it's like, well, that is true. He's not wrong, but
it's the same thing when he said, I stood between you and the pitchforks to all the bankers.
Right.
Like, why did you do that?
Thanks, man. That was great that you did that. Those are smart people.
I'm going to leave him right there.
All right, we got more of this?
No, it's just
yeah, look, but this first part, the first step kind of makes sense, though. This is very traditional political hand motions right here. He's doing the thumb. He's got this going on.
Wasn't it one of those?
That's Bill Clinton.
Wasn't there one of those?
Now it's middle school softball coach.
Those French guys, those French philosophers who says he watches the news without the sound on.
I know a lot of PR people do that.
Yeah, who does that? But yeah, you can watch.
One of Reagan's press guys said that they would, even when they would check the news every night with the sound off, and even when the stories are bad, if they had a montage of Reagan just like looking grandfatherly, they won. Yeah. It doesn't matter what he said. So, yeah.
I don't think it works anymore.
I don't think it works anymore either. But yeah, man, I don't know. Like I do find, like, I have a big problem with most people that don't support Bernie, but I found that I have like the biggest problem with people that are supporting Beto right now. Like there's always something you could say to me about another candidate that even if I don't buy it, doesn't fundamentally offend me. Mm-hmm. But the Beto shit is just like, are you fucking kidding me?
Do you know a lot of people supporting him? I don't think I know anyone in real life.
Oh, well.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I'm including Twitter samples.
I was just home in Austin, and there's a lot of people talking about Beto. Which was a little exhausting. And I couldn't get them to tell me anything other than it's like, it's just, we need youth and energy.
To do what?
To have youth and energy.
To have youth and energy.
So to have the White House back so we can all just stop paying attention to
it's like, but that's what
so people can go back to brunch.
Yeah, exactly.
Go back to brunch and watch HBO Go. But like, what's amazing is like,
it's so specific.
So that's how you.
Michael's looking
not
forward to the
HBO now, but HBO Go.
HBO Go. Go. Yeah.
Okay.
Be specific.
For your kids.
For your kids, you shouldn't have to think about any of this.
We have too many families sharing logins and streaming services.
We have too many families. You want to watch maybe even try Hulu. Get wild. But you're worried about Donald Trump ending humanity.
I can watch every episode of Dragon Ball Z.
What do you think he watches, though? He watches.
I bet he's a Dragon Ball Z nerd.
I don't even know if Dragon Ball Z is, but Beto watches like I know it exists.
Okay.
But okay.
I just remember all right. Continue.
No, go ahead. What's the Dragon Ball Z reminiscence?
I don't know.
Go for it.
I'm not like a fan. I just remember coming home after school, and it was like this red and white thing, right? Wasn't a red and white ball.
Yeah, it was a yellow ball with red stars in it.
Okay.
Okay, so but what do we think that Beto watches though?
I just said.
Okay, he's watching Dragon Ball Z. I don't
He's
think
a
so.
Power Rangers kind of dude.
I think that's a super strong guess right there. And I bet he will get Haim Sabin money, too.
He said he
What
questions the special relationship between Israel and the U.S., though.
That is actually true. He might not
I'll look
get
up the actual quote.
Wouldn't that be great if he just everything else is
He's
that except he becomes Max Blumenthal? He's just, it's an occupation and it's racist. He just starts wiling out on Israel. Benjamin Netanyahu confirms every anti-Semitic stereotype you've ever seen.
What if he's questioning it so it could be stronger? Like was he specific about it? I don't know.
He called Netanyahu a racist.
He
which
did?
By like mainstream Democratic standards is like equivalent to like burning a bank. I'm Ilhan Omar in khakis.
Yeah, he says, these truths that we hold so dear, that we are all created equal, all of us. Okay, let me try to skip to where it is.
No, just do it.
All right, I'll do the whole thing
just
then.
do it. Fuck
Needs to mean all of us. Not relationships of convenience for short-term security gains, but relationships that allow us to continue to be the example for so much of the rest of the world. And we cannot be that if we do not believe in the fundamental human rights and human dignity and safety of our fellow human beings, regardless of what side of the line they may stand or sit on.
Jesus Christ.
So many words.
All right, here's
so many words. I prefer a Likud answer to that.
I think we're getting to the
It's just
meaning,
so
the meat here. The only way that I know that we can help to secure that in the Middle East, specifically with the Palestinian Authority in Israel, is to have two states whose people are guaranteed their security, their safety, their dignity, and their political rights. Right now, of course, we do not have that. Oh, I can't read all
you know
this.
what's so unfair about that? Do you remember when I interviewed on this show Kevin De Leon?
Oh yeah.
Usually we don't interview politicians on this show, but I was like, whatever. He's taking because of Kevin De Leon, and it was so unfair because it was the same morning I did a pre-record with Mike Hanna, who's like a legendary journalist, and then Ronnie Casserols, who was literally an ANC revolutionary, and then we have on Kevin De Leon, and I'm keeping no professional etiquette here, but we asked him about Israel-Palestine, and he basically gave exactly the same kind of like wish-washy bullshit answer, but because he has he doesn't have any of that verbiage, it was just like, oh my God, man, this is boring. But Beto gets away with it. It's totally unfair. He was just like, yeah, people should be at peace with one another. Next, please.
So he didn't do like the equivalent. I think I tweeted about this where you're trying to like fill pages of a book report. Yeah. So you just say all the words.
No, I think you said that Beto's speeches remind you of like pulling an all-nighter.
Did I?
Is that what you said?
Well, there was a lot of Beto.
No, because there was one clip of Beto where it really like people were passing it around like this is great, and I was honestly like, is he having a manic episode? Like I don't know what the fuck he's saying.
Even in the clip we played earlier, where he's like, there's all these filler words because he's like, it doesn't matter how old you are or how young you are. You won't have lived through a time so it's like you could be so young that you lived through a time that was more corrupt than this, or so, like you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, there's no reason to have that in there, but he just goes.
He makes you want to be a nerd.
He's like, these are not meaningless words that I'm saying right now.
Yeah, right. These are really important, and
when you hear the soundtrack, you're gonna understand it.
And when you see wheat fields and American flags rustling under this, you will be inspired to waste a lot more time with me being president. If he becomes president, I'm gonna. I don't even know.
I don't know. Anything's possible. He's like the opposite of Trump, where it's both. It's emptiness, but one is just like evil emptiness, and one is like do-gooder emptiness.
And then one's fun emptiness and one's boring emptiness.
Yeah, because Trump is a lot more fun.
Trump's at least.
Beto's not going to be.
Trump's at least a
And by the
stand-up.
way, they're all losers. I outraised all of them, probably because they're out of shape.
By the way, John McCain did not thank me for the beautiful funeral I put on for him.
I sent out a beautiful tweet about John, and even though we did not serve in the same body of Congress, I thought it was super low class that he didn't respond.
Or shut
I'm
his
glad
daughter
he's
up.
dead. That's an angle. If Beto O'Rourke goes Trump, I'll like him a lot more.
If we can't bury the legacy of John McCain right here, right now.
And by the way, I'm sick of seeing his fucking daughter on The View. All right. Basically, Beto O'Rourke becomes me. Okay, we are going to go to the postgame. You're going to hang out with us for the first half of the postgame?
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. I want to thank everybody for making the show possible. I appreciate all of you patrons immensely, and I want to thank Matt and David and Forrest and Vic, who's making, I mean, dude, the ad for the illicit histories, come on. It's amazing. Harvey K apparently is watching us live. Mentor Harvey K. Peace and love to Wisconsin, actually. Harvey K in Wisconsin. Very Wisconsin-heavy TMBS in general, in fact. In the post-game, we have actually a really good clip of Nipsey Hussle we're going to play. We have election updates in Turkey. We have AMLO's first 100 days. I know I said 100 years last week. I was really tired. The second, AMLO has not been in power for 100 years.
Looking forward to the first 100 years of AMLO's reign.
And 75 years in, it's when the second edition of The Debunk with Ben Burgess. We're talking about this Sam Harris nonsense on Twitter. And I'll give you a little bit more of a tease of my book. Become a patron now, patreon.com/TMBS. Get your tickets to the Bootleg Theater on April 20th, the West Coast live show with all of us, plus Big Waz, Anna Kasparian, and Nando Vila. That show is going to be incredible. At the Bootleg Theater in Koreatown, April 20th. Get yourself set up, get yourself nice, and come see us. Patreon.com/TMBS. We'll see you in the postgame.